Sometimes hallelujah, sometimes praise the Lord, sometimes gently singing our hearts in one accord.
Hi, everybody. I'm Brian Mason, and I want to welcome you to this particular interview we're doing with some old friends. The guy I'm going to talk to today is a guy I've known since he moved to Middle Tennessee, I think in 2008. But man, what a history he brought to Tennessee with him. For many people my age, the beginning of music, real music appreciation for us, happened February 9th, 1964, when the Beatles were on the Ed Sullivan Show. That was the switch that really got flipped for a lot of people that I know. This guy had already had a top 10 single on the radio, which was very cool. And as a kid, I was listening to it as well, which was pretty cool. I want to introduce and welcome Chuck Girard. Chuck, welcome.
Thank you, Brian. Great to be here.
Good to have you here. When you think back on those early days, what was music like in those days? Certainly not like it is today.
Well, at my age, what do you mean by the early days?
The Gregorian chants that you were involved
cover
in.
several areas. You mean my earliest musical
earliest.
appreciation?
Yeah.
Well, the first thing I remember was I was just a kid, a little baby, 4 years old or so, and it was the era of 78 records, and my mom was sort of a music fan, and so we had this record player, and the two artists that I remember being, I wouldn't say influenced, but that I remember hearing and appreciating were ironic bedfellows, Gene Autry and Mario Lanza. Mario Lanza was a pop tenor that had, more operatic voice, and of course Gene Autry was country. So I'd listen to Pistol Packin' Mama along with Be My Love, and it was a real weird kind of a mashup of these two genres that were my first musical experience. And then I always enjoyed music. I wasn't really into being a musician at that point, but I listened to music throughout my younger life. And then the next, I don't remember what word you used, but sort of milestone for me was the first kind of music that got me thinking about being in music myself was doo-wop. And I have an older sister that was bringing home records like Five Satins, Still of the Night, and Shodo and Shobido, and all those cool records. And then I remember a girl came over to the house to visit. We lived in San Francisco at the time. And a friend of my sister's came over, and we had a little spin-up piano in the living room, and she played the chords to Heart and Soul. Bum-ba-da-da, bum-ba-da-da, bum-ba-da. Right. Well, that's the heart of rock and roll. Something went off inside of me. I don't know. I can't explain it, but it was like the key to the musical universe had been opened up. And I asked her, can you teach me those chords? And so she did. And
were you tinkering on the keyboard at all at this point?
I was probably 15, 14. Yeah, I was starting. I was actually taking some piano lessons, but I didn't. I had a classical piano teacher, and I didn't really relate to the reading music thing. There was a guy, I remember, one of her students who was a very good keyboard player, but he did boogie woogie, and I was more interested. I'd come in for my lesson, and we'd be doing boogie woogie, and she'd come in and say, "Stop that noise!" She was a Russian lady, Lydia Klepakov. Actually, how I remember her name, I don't know. So, but I was more interested in the boogie woogie than I was the classical. So I started to pick up, these 45s of the doo-wop music. Then the next big thing that hit my musical consciousness was Elvis. I had really not heard of Elvis yet when I heard my first Elvis record, and it was I Want You, I Need You, I Love You. And I don't remember what I was, radio or whatever. I heard this song and I went, okay, This is what I want to do. I mean, I can't be him. I know that.
Right.
But I got to be involved. This is cool. This music is really cool. I love doo-wop, but this was even better. And then I started to hear, of course, he was up and coming at the time, and I started to hear his name everywhere. And then Ed Sullivan Show and all that came up. So I was really connected and interested in his music, and started to then at that point tinker with the piano. I wasn't introduced to the guitar till later. And what I would do is I'd train my ear. I'd buy these 45s. By this time now, I'm living in Santa Rosa, California. We'd moved from San Francisco.
Which is what, north of San Francisco?
About an hour north.
Okay.
And so I found this jukebox company, and they would sell me the 45s out of the jukebox for 10 cents a piece. So that was in my budget.
That's a deal.
Right? So I'd go there after school, and I'd get as many as I could. You know, the hit side was white from being
All
played
worn
so
out.
many times. You know,
Sure.
The other side was pristine, and but they still played. And so I started to catalog them and get really into them. And then I started to by ear train myself to hear the chords on these songs. You know, I couldn't slow it down like you can now. It's kind of a weird process, but I play a little bit and then I try to find it on the piano. And that was my first venture into something that wasn't like the original piano lessons were reading music and all that. This was my first venture into more impromptu type of, you know, playing by ear, as we say. And so that's how I trained my ear. And then I had a choir teacher, Santa Rosa High School, Mr. Barkley, that took an interest in me. And after school, I'd go in and he began to teach me the basics of music theory. And he'd teach me 1-3-5 is a major chord, and you lower the third and it's minor. So I started to learn all that. And then I'd take that home, learn it in different keys, doing my part, my homework. And eventually then that led to starting to write some rudimentary songs. You know, my first song was called Since I Lost You, that I ever wrote. It had a boom, ba-da-da-da-da, boom. And so that was like beginning to, you know, do songwriting, and then kind of.
And by now you are going to be a musician. You're headed headlong right.
That's
into it,
really what I wanted to do, but I didn't see any path to making any money at that point. But I hooked up in choir class with some guys that had like mind, you know, and we loved the music. And so what we started to do was we started a little doo-wop group, mainly really when we were supposed to be practicing choir parts for Mr. Barkley, we would practice our doo-wop. We didn't even know how to make harmonies yet.
Right.
So we'd sing all the harmonies in unison, and then after a while we figured out, okay, if you sing this part, we can get
Break
that
it
cool
out.
sound, learning as we go. Then we had an opportunity. We actually put a few songs together, and we had one or two of mine that we'd learned. And we somehow, I don't remember exactly how we connected with a local DJ. His name was Dan Dillon, and he was at a station called KJAX in Santa Rosa that was one of the two rock stations. It was KSRO and KJAX. And we went up to, we'd go up to the transmitter was up a hillside, and we'd go up there and bring a 6-pack of beer. And in those days, there were no playlists. You know, the DJs played what they
Whatever
wanted.
you wanted, yeah.
So we would playlist the next hour. We'd say, play this next, and we'd talk in between.
And this is the late 50s?
Yeah. Yeah, 57.
Okay.
Yeah, around in there.
So
And
you're
so-
actually telling the DJ what to play.
Yeah, he'd play whatever, you know, play this
Wow.
next. And then we'd leave him a little list. And we'd say, play these when we leave. And so we'd hear our songs as we were going home. Well, he had a few connections. He got us on a show at Santa Rosa Memorial Hall there.
The four of you guys
Yeah.
from the choir.
We were now called Castels. And he got us on a show with Sano and Johnny that had Sleepwalk, if you remember the
I do.
instrumental.
Yeah.
And so this was big time for us. So we appeared with Sano and Johnny, and wow, you know, we're getting known in high school now as being a viable group in the town. And Dan had some connections, and he said, you guys need to make a demo. So I got $100 from my mom. We went to San Francisco to a little studio called Sound Recorders, and we made this demo. And actually, by this time, we had befriended a group of another group like us that were called the Blackwells. And they lived in Cloverdale, and we would go up there and we'd hang with them, and we'd play music and sing harmony with them, and got to know them. And so when we did our session in San Francisco, we asked Dwayne if he would come with us and play guitar. Well, Dwayne went on to become a world-renowned songwriter. The first thing, they had a group that sounded a lot like the Fleetwoods, the Blackwells. You can YouTube them, and their music's on all over YouTube and on Spotify and all as well, the Blackwells. And so they had this song they wrote called Mr. Blue for their group. And they meet the Fleetwoods. They're on the road. Fleetwoods hear it. They want to record it.
Fleetwoods had a hit with that song. Oh, my goodness.
So they did that one. There was a couple of others that they did that were not as big a hits, but the Fleetwoods did them. And then Brother Ron, one of the other guys, he wrote this song called Little Red Riding Hood.
Wait a minute, Brother Ron was in
Blackwell.
Was in the other band.
Yeah,
not your band.
One of the three people in a little trio. They were two brothers and a sister.
Gotcha.
And I still know the sister today. She's become a Christian over the years, and we still stay in touch. Ron died around in the late 60s. He was tired or drunk or whatever, and ran his car into outside of Petaluma, California, into a cement support for a freeway, and was killed. And Dwayne became a Jehovah's Witness, and then he came to Nashville, and he wrote Friends in Low Places for Garth Brooks.
Wow.
And made a bit of a fortune there, wrote other things, and he's moved to Mexico. And I tried to get a hold of him, but I think he knew I was a Christian, and he wasn't really. He still was a Jehovah's Witness, so we didn't really connect.
But so who wrote Little Red Riding Hood? Is that
his brother.
The Sam, the Sham, and the Pharaohs?
Right, the same one.
Wow.
And they had some other stuff. They wrote some stuff for Roy Orbison, and they were coming quite well. I think they really wanted to be a group, but they were becoming more known as songwriters.
Wow.
Because they were having this little bit of success. So he came to San Francisco, and he played guitar on a little demo. It was just guitar and piano, our piano player, and our vocals. We took that down to... he gave this Dan Dillon, disc jockey from K-Jax, he gave us the addresses and the connections for, I think, 4 labels that he knew. One of them was Crystalette, that had tan shoes and pink shoelaces with Dodie Stevens. We went to find that, and they had moved, so they weren't there anymore. Believe it or not, we went to Aladdin, which was more of a R&B label. And they liked us. We were a little white bread doo-wop group from Santa Rosa. And they were very interested, and they said, you guys, we're interested, get back with us, and we'll think about it. And so we were kind of talking with them. We went to Dot Records, and I forget what the guy's name was there, but he was not that interested. He took us in a room. I remember he showed us a stack of singles. He said, see these? He said, I got to go through these all day long, and... whatever. And so whatever his reason was, he wasn't that interested. But then we went to this label called Era. Now, Era was pretty hot right then. They'd come off of the biggest thing they'd had up to that point was Wayward Wind by Gogi Grant.
Yeah.
And then they were starting to emerge again with a little more current sound with Donnie Brooks' Mission Bell, and the record that couldn't be released today, Mr. Custer, because of political correctness with Larry Verne. And later on, after we signed, he signed Jewel Akins, who had the Birds and the Bees. And so they were a pretty successful little independent label. And Herb, go ahead.
What was the song that you did in the demo?
Oh, well, we did a reimagining of the old standard, My Foolish Heart. We did one of my songs that I wrote called The Vision of You. We did the B-side to A Book of Love by the Monotones, which is called... Chapel Bells, I hear them ringing, bong, angel choirs. And then what was the 4th song? I can't, maybe it was a 4th song I'm not sure about. But so anyhow, Herb took our demo in and met with us and listened to it. And he said, look, I've just signed my roster for the year, so I can't sign you guys, but keep me in mind. And if you decide to go with Aladdin, give me a call and I'll walk you through anything I'll give you counsel.
Wow.
So right about that time, a guy named Billy Sherman walks in. Sherman Dvorzan Music was a huge publishing company. It was Barry Dvorzan who had a hit or two on his own, and then Billy Sherman. They had this very successful publishing company, and he was a friend of Herb's. And he came in the office, and we were already out of the meeting room, and Herb said, "Hey, come here, Billy, I want you to hear something." So he plays him our demo. Now, we're not in there. We close the door, and we just know they're in there listening to the demo. So as soon as 15, 20 minutes later, Herb comes out and he says, "Guys, I've changed my mind. I'm willing to sign you. I'll make room for you." Because apparently Billy Sherman heard something, and he came and said,
Wow.
"Don't let these guys get out of here." I don't know what happened in there,
Yeah.
but that's what I imagine. So now we had our record contract, and the first kind of encounter with the industry that we had a piano player. He was more of a kind of a doo-wop guy that played triplets on the piano, and we loved what he did, and it fit our group. So as we get ready to record our first songs and all that, and they weren't our songs, by the way. Herb was picking songs that songwriters had written,
Right.
Sacred and So This Is Love were not our songs. But, it was okay. We had a record contract, and it was okay that we weren't making any money. It was all cool because that's...
You're in the industry.
That's right.
Yeah.
So the first thing, they're getting ready for the session, the first sessions, and they said, "Well, guys, your piano player can't play on the records because we've got Hank Levine here, and he's the arranger of all these hit records, and he has these musicians that he uses, which happen to be, they weren't named this yet, but they were called the Wrecking Crew now."
Wow.
So it was guys like Hal Blaine and Carol Kay and all those people that played on our records. So when you have Don Randy or Leon Russell to play piano,
That's okay.
Our little piano player isn't going to cut it. But the records were really not where our heart was. We liked the little simple sound, the R&B thing we had going. So they came out as produced records, and they were more pop sounding. And, we didn't love it, but hey, it was exciting, and our, heads in clouds because we're signed to
Are you on the radio? They play on the radio?
Eventually. Now, the first record that came out, my bandmate Joe Kelly sang lead, and it was called Little Sad Eyes, and it went to what they call bubbling under on the charts, which means you didn't quite make the Hot 100.
Right.
There was the 30 positions underneath, but it was number 129 with an anchor, so instead of a bullet. So that one fizzled out, and then the second one, Sacred, did go into the top 20. And then we had a third record that did bubbling under again. And we had a lot of support in LA. We had DJs that they had a pick to click thing that they did on KRLA, and we were pick to click several times with people like Jimmy Owens. It was not Jimmy Owens, O'Neill. Anyhow, the Boss Jocks, Sam Riddle, and so we had a lot of favor in LA, and our songs were really big on the charts in LA.
Gary Owen?
No, it wasn't Gary Owen. Okay. It was I had the Jimmy O'Neill, I think. Okay. He had a TV show later on, maybe Shindig. He was the host of that. So we did have favor in LA, but not so much in the rest of the nation. And so the songs never went to top 10. They got in the 20s. So the Make Believe Wedding was the third one, and it was bubbling under, and then So This Is Love came out, and that went higher than Sacred, I think. And so that was the complete chart performance of the Castels at that point. We had a couple later on that got into low positions on the charts, but nothing that ever really took off after that. But it got us on the map, and we started to tour. And we were on some pretty big shows in those days. I played shows with, I was at the Hollywood Bowl, watched Jerry Lee Lewis storm off the stage because the audience wasn't responding according to his expectations. Wow. So he walked off the stage until they clapped him back on. Like, if you want me, you better respond the way I want you to. I'll never forget that. And Brenda Lee, Bobby V, even Jackie Wilson, people that were not destined to be big as those artists, but I remember was it the Angels that had My Boyfriend's Back,
Mm-hmm.
and different people that were, we're kids with stars in our eyes.
Yeah.
We're hanging with the big
You're in
guys.
the industry.
We
You're
are.
doing
And
what you want to do.
anybody that tells you that's not thrilling is lying.
Oh, no.
I mean, back then especially.
Sure.
So that was kind of our first encounter, and we toured around with that group, and
The name Castels, where did that come from?
we were doing a thing called the Canteen in Santa Rosa, California. It was in a public building where they would have a weekly gathering where kids could come and local groups could play and the kids could dance. And we hadn't even thought about a name. We practiced and we signed up for the Canteen and we were booked that night. So they asked us, "What's your name?" And we said, "Well, we don't have a name." And Jeff Bush said, "Well, I remember either he played with a group called the Castels or he knew of a group." He says, "And they're not playing anymore. So let's use that and we can change it later." So we became the Castels that night and just never
just
changed
stuck.
it. Yeah, it just stuck. And we did terrible that night. We were horrible. I don't know how people could even...
Are there any recordings from any of those live?
Not the
performances?
live, but we have some of the early demos still that are not too bad, Our signature sound was there. One of the things I would observe about the Castels is that it was one of those magic combinations that you can't put together corporately. You can't say, let's gather 4 singers and have them have this magic sound. It's just the stuff that happened with the Beach Boys or any group, the Beatles, that just happened to be that right combination of voices. And we really did have a unique sound, in my opinion. None of us sounded like we would blend. Everybody sang differently.
Really?
And we had this high
Yeah.
Irish tenor, and the bass player was kind of boxy, the bass singer. And then we had me, a little nasal me in the middle, but yet the chemistry when it all came together, it was a beautiful sound. And if you go to YouTube and listen to those records today, they're beautiful.
I have. Yeah, they really are. It reminded me of like the Four Freshmen or the Letterman or that kind of rich vocal styling kind of a thing. It wasn't rock, maybe pop. I don't know if that word was used in those days.
I
But
like to call it neo doo-wop because it was sort of doo-wop polished.
yes,
It wasn't yet rock.
good.
But, it's interesting because the Letterman came after us, but they became much bigger than we were. And we did a show once with Tony Butala came up to me and he said, "We ripped you guys off." And we said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Yeah, we took your lift from Sacred, had a little lift in it. Went to bump bum 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 bum." And he said, "We use that on The Way You Look Tonight. There's the way you look tonight." And he admitted that so we influenced the Letterman, which was a cool thing.
Yeah.
And so anyhow,
Once again, you didn't make any money on that, but you're in the business.
yeah, we get our our bragging rights.
Sure. Well, how long did that group last?
We were really only together a few years. After our hits, it was a mutual agreement to sever our contracts. I don't remember whether they were up or whether they hadn't been renewed, but we both agreed it was over. And then I connected with Gary Usher for the next season of my life, and Gary revived the group, and we did a few sides for Decca. At one point, just died this year, Joe Smith was the head of Warner Brothers, and he signed us, and we did 3 cuts for him under another guy named Rolla Beta. That was a friend of Gary's that we'd met through working with Gary Usher. So let me kind of bring you up to the Gary Usher part of it. In those days, there were things called sock hops, and kids would come into a gym, kind of an atmosphere, and take their shoes off.
Right.
And the artists would not actually perform as we know it today. They would just lip sync, but they were there in the flesh, right?
Yeah.
You didn't even, you sang, but you weren't really, they were hearing the record and watching you lip sync, but it was live. And so there was a group performing that night that their record had either just come out or was just coming out. And it was one of the first car songs ever. It was called, the group was the RPM. I gotta get my RPM. It was Gary Usher.
Wow.
Gary Usher went on to write, in my room with Brian Wilson.
I was going to say, we cannot go past the Gary Usher name because he is just fundamental in that Beach Boy era and just all that surfer stuff. Yeah. So in my room, he wrote some other stuff too.
He wrote some other lesser things with Brian, but the key was that if people that know Beach Boy bios know that Brian had a single writing partner at any given time, and then sometimes Murray Wilson would edge them out for the new guy who became like Van Dyke Parks or
Murray
or
Wilson
Asher
being,
or whoever.
being Brian and
Brian's
the brother's father, yeah.
right. So Gary was the flavor of the month writer, and for a while, you know, and Roger Christian was involved, the KRLA DJ who wrote a lot of those hot rod surf songs as early, even with the Beach Boys. You see Roger Christian's name on a lot of Beach Boys songs. So Gary knew our music because we had songs on the charts, and he was talking to me backstage. He says, you know, I'm beginning to do a lot of these work for hire things where I'm doing kind of what Brian's doing. I'm doing surf music, hot rod music, and do you want to make some extra money and you can sing on these things? Well, extra money is always attractive. So I said yes. I was kind of reticent though because it was technically breach of contract. But what he talked me into it, what Gary said to me, he said, well, you know, Brian's doing it for Jan and Dean. And he said, Brian's getting away with it, and he's the Beach Boys, so you should have no problem. So very quickly graduated from realizing that I could make triple scale. It was all union. I didn't get any royalties. It was all work for hire.
Wow.
But I could make 3 times if I sang lead. And I thought, well, you know, I'm disguising my voice because I basically was singing like a kind of a parody version of Mike Love. I actually, on a couple of songs, literally held my nose. You go like this and you da-da-da to get that nasal sound, you know. Stuff like that. And just basically doing this kind of country and western thing that Mike Love does. She got her daddy's car and she cruising through the hamburger stand now, you know.
Right.
He's kind of doing this parody of Mike Love, really. Yeah. And made a lot of money doing that for about 4 years, union scale. And we worked with the Wrecking Crew, Glenn Campbell, and all those guys were on these records. They were the musicians on call in those days, and anybody that could afford triple scale could hire them, you know. So Gary was making quality records in that regard, and so those guys played on the records. And
whose records were they, though?
They would be work for hire. He would go to a company, like he had people he knew at different labels, and Capitol, let's say, would say, he'd come in and say, well, you know, nobody's done a slot car album, you know. Ravel called me and they want us to do a slot car album. So we would take hot rod songs,
just compile the
and
hot
change
rod
them to slot car, you know. Instead of hot rod high, it'd be slot car high or something. And then write some original stuff too. But a lot of it was recycled because it was quick work. We'd make these albums in like a week, you know, just stay in the studio for 8 hours a day for 5 days and make an
great
album.
money.
Wow. Good, you know, union scale was pretty good for a 21-year-old alcoholic kid from Pasadena.
Wow.
So that was my experience for about 4 years with Gary, and we just churning these things out. They'd be finished. I'd never see them again until later on when collectors started to put them together, and I'd hear things that I recorded years earlier. But all of a sudden one day, I lived in Pasadena, California, and I'm driving down the street, and I have the radio on, and I hear this familiar track. And I go, I know this song. It's a Beach Boy song. And then all of a sudden I listen a little closer, and I go, but that's me singing.
You didn't remember?
I didn't. Well, I hadn't heard the record since we made it. What happened was Gary had contracted with a guy named Nick Venet, who was at Capitol when the Beach Boys were signed, and he became their first producer. But he had moved from Capitol to Mercury, and so Gary knew him from his Capitol days. And so he told him, Nick Venet told Gary, he says, I want to make a song about this new phenomena of these little Hondas that are coming up. And Brian's got a song about a little Honda, and you guys could do that one, and you could fill it out. And so let's make a little motorbike album.
Yeah.
So we did. And we had the same players and recycled some of the same songs, and a lot of it were instrumentals. The guy that actually was the guy that did the instrumentals usually was a guy named Richie Podler. And Richie Podler was a really good guitar player. So he would do these little instrumentals. They'd call them Black Boots and Bikes or something. But it would just be a surfy kind of instrumental. So about, 4 out of 12 songs were instrumentals. So the album, the song came out and went top 10.
This is what you heard yourself
Yep.
over the radio in Pasadena.
Right.
What's the song? Little
It's
Honda?
Little Honda, yeah.
Okay. But you didn't know, did you know it was going to be released? You
No,
just knew you'd done
I had no idea it was going to be released. It was a
Wow.
total surprise to me. And so I called Gary right away, and I said, Gary, I just heard our song on the radio. He said, yeah, it's going up. It's like, it's climbing the charts. So then the next thing was to put a group together. Well, I didn't want to be in a group. I was making good money. I wanted my drinking time at night. Had a little bar in Pasadena where I'd go shoot pool and drink beer at night.
Your place.
And so I really wasn't interested in a tour. So they put together a road group, and there was one of Gary's friends. There was a guy named Dick Burns that later on did the leads for the future Hondell things that they did, which was, it was already dying out. Well, just to be clear, I made 2 albums as the Hondells. It was the Go Little Honda record and the Hondells eponymous album, they call it, self-titled. After that, there were some remakes. They did Sea Cruise, and Richie sang lead on those, and actually Mike Curb was involved in those, because Mike Curb used to come into our sessions and steal Gary's producing chops. He'd sit around and listen what Gary was doing, and then later on he cut Meet the Nicest People on a Honda, which had nothing to do with me or the original Hondells. It was actually a guy named Jerry Naylor that sang lead on that. I didn't find that out till years later. I met Jerry Naylor, and he told me he was the lead on that. And Jerry Naylor was the guy that took over for Buddy Holly when Buddy died. For the history of the whole thing.
Yeah. All right, let me stop you there, too.
Yeah.
When I went to YouTube and was looking up, and I've done this before, Hondells, Little Honda, I see some TV performances.
Mm-hmm.
You're never doing the TV performances, are you?
I'm doing the singing, but not the appearance.
Right. So the track, the audio track, he's just, the guys, they're lip syncing to
Yeah.
your...
By that time, they had forged this,
the group.
identity as a group.
Right.
And the another part of the story, I'll get back to the movies, was that now it was time. Little Honda was a big record, and now we have to have a follow-up single. So Gary picked a younger girl that was a John Sebastian song,
Yeah.
Love and Spoonful.
Sure.
And they said, we don't want Chuck to sing it because we want to be able to duplicate it when we go on the road. So a guy named Randy Thomas, not the one in the Christian
Right.
band, did the lead on that song. And so now they could duplicate that song on the road. But when it came to the movies, they were on the road, and Gary would get a contract to do Ski Party or Muscle Beach Party or whatever. So I would do all the music for the movies, and then those guys would lip sync in the movie. And so Richie Burns is lip syncing my voice when you see the Hondells in a movie. And I think there's 4 movies we did with about 5 songs.
So Younger Girl, was that in the movies?
I don't believe that was ever in a movie. It might have been, but I'd have to look that up.
But when I heard Younger Girl on YouTube, that's not your vocal?
It's not my lead vocal.
Okay,
I'm singing
'cause it
doo-wah
sounds-
in the background.
Oh, you are on the, okay.
Yeah, it does sound
Sounds a lot like
a little
you.
bit like me,
Yeah.
but it's Randy Thomas. And so then back to so we are back to the movies. So anyhow, we had fun doing that, and but now the era of the Hondells is winding down, and like I say, Mike Curb got involved, and they started trying to keep it alive, and they cut a bunch of songs that you can also find on YouTube, but I'm not involved in anything but the first 2 Mercury albums. So that was my brief encounter into making me what we call today a 4-hit wonder. But,
but you
3
had
of which I was lead vocal, and 1 of which I was just...
Little Honda reached number 9 nationally.
Yes.
So you had
Actually, I have a top 10 record.
You had a top 10 record, Chuck, which was great, and it was a great time for music as well.
It was.
What, 1963 are we up to?
Yeah,
2 or 3?
61 and 62 were Sacred, and So This Is Love. 66 was Little Honda, I think, if my memory
Okay,
serves.
I was thinking it was earlier than that.
You might be right. I might be wrong.
But the Beach Boys also covered it and released it.
Well,
on
actually, the
album
Beach
as well.
Boys released it before us.
Oh, they did?
Yeah, they had it out on the All Summer Long album, and
Okay.
Gary just handed me the album. He said, go home and learn this. And a little bit of trivia here. 2 things. First of all, to my knowledge, we're the only group, and I'm pretty knowledgeable, so I could be wrong, but I think we're the only group that ever beat the Beach Boys to their own song without being a cover of their already hit.
Wow.
Because Brian rushed theirs out as soon as he heard ours climbing the chart, and they never caught us. They had it on a little 4-song EP,
Yeah.
and it did get some airplay, but it never charted as high as ours. So I think that's a distinction that we have that no one else carries.
Nice.
And what else about that?
Well, tell your Brian Wilson story. Did you
Oh, you're talking about the...
autograph?
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell.
Okay. Well, in one of these sock hops, the Beach Boys aren't known yet. And I didn't know who they were. But our record's already been on the charts a couple of months. I'd never heard of the Beach Boys.
Wait, Hondel's has been on the charts? Or
No, Castels.
Castels, okay.
Castels. This is 61, 62.
Okay,
Look back on the chronology. I think the Beach Boys were shortly after that.
correct.
So we're at this sock hop, and this kid comes up to me, and he says, "You're in the Castels, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah." He says, "I love your record. Can I have your autograph?" So I signed his autograph. And I says, "So are you guys playing tonight?" And he says, "Yeah." I said, "What's the name of your group?" He said, "We're the Beach Boys." Well, I'd never heard of the Beach Boys. And I says, "And what's your name?" He says, "Brian." I said, "Oh, do good, Brian, tonight." Like patting him on the head, So then they go on, and of course. Now then I had several encounters with them over the years. Then of course I was still never connected to them as a fan yet. That was very, I don't know, it was silly music to me. Bomb bomb dip 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 dip.
Yeah.
Early
That
in the
early stuff
morning.
of theirs, yeah, was a lot of it.
It was okay though. Later on, I came to appreciate it more than I did back in those days. But then one day, I was over somebody's house, and I think it was the Shutdown Volume 2 album. It had a song on it called "Ballad of Old Betsy," and as the old saying goes, "You had me at the first note." This was a beautiful song. Is actually some of the older folks might remember a song called "Naughty Lady of Shady Lane" by the Ames Brothers, which was a song about a naughty lady, and she did all these naughty things, and at the end it turns out it's a baby that they're singing about. Well, this was similar in the regard that it sounded like a love song she was born in 32 in West Ever Pretty, rode a freight train west all the way to Detroit City, talks about her, and then at the end it's a car.
It's a car.
She may be rusted iron, but to me she's solid gold, and I just can't hold the tears back because Betsy's growing old. But it had these beautiful 4 freshman harmonies and all this stuff going on, and I thought, man, this is real music. These guys are really into something. So I'm trying to think of the chronology. I want to get it right here. So I can't remember whether I'd met Gary and worked with Brian. See, I worked with Brian in the studio through Gary, but I think this had happened earlier. I'm going to take a chance that this is the correct chronology because Castels had a manager that his secretary was a girl named Ginger Blake, who was in a trio with Brian's future wife,
Yeah.
Diane and
Wasn't the Honeycombs? What was
the Honeys.
The Honeys, that's it, yeah.
Surfing down the Swanee River. And Ginger was in this group, and she was working as a secretary for this guy, Mike Connors, not the actor, was his name. And we had heard that Brian by now the Beach Boys are pretty hot. And so it came up, maybe we could get Brian to produce, he knows your group, maybe he'll produce the Castels. So we approached him, and he agreed to do that. So they set up a session, and we're all going down there, all excited. By now, Brian Wilson is like becoming a god in my eyes. In the first days I met him, it was like, who are you guys? But now all of a sudden I have this new respect for him. And we go into the studio, I think it was Western Studios on Sunset Boulevard, and there's no musicians in there. We're waiting for the wrecking crew. We're going, what's up here? Brian says, I already cut this track for the Beach Boys, but we're not going to do it with the Beach Boys, so we're just going to put your voices on it. So we spent the day or two doing the background vocals and the lead vocal, and end of the recording session was about 6 p.m., and all the Beach Boys come in the studio because they're hooking up with Brian to go up to Capitol. They have a session that night. So they all listen to our cut, and I remember Mike Love complimenting my falsetto. He said, hey, good job on the falsetto. I don't know, they must have been a little bit weirded out because it was supposed to be their song.
Wow.
So then
What
Brian
was the song? What was
called I Do.
Okay.
There was a Beach Boys song called County Fair that had the same melody. Da 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 da. It's on one of the first albums. Brian had reworked it, and he made it into a song about fidelity. You know, I've gone steady with lots of girls, and all of them I try to be true, but I'm so glad I never promised them what I promised you, and that's I do.
Well, now I've gone steady with lots of girls, and to all of them I try to be true. But I'm so glad I never promised them what I promised you. And that's I do. I do, yes I do now. Take you, I'll take you now.
So we did this Beach Boy kind of vocal on it, and that was when we were under contract to Warner Brothers, and it came out on Warner Brothers, but it never, that I know, charted at all.
It was a Castels
release. And so at the end of the day, when we finished all the recording, Brian says, "You want to come up to Capitol with us tonight? We're recording." Maybe the single biggest regret of my life, because I had to go back to Pasadena and drink beer and shoot pool. So I said no.
You said no?
And they recorded their version of the Lord's Prayer that night, and I would have been, if I could live my life over us, not much I'd change, but I changed that.
Wow.
So I missed that, and it really later, because see, still they're not the
They reached the
idols,
pinnacle,
the icons they became. They're
Right.
still just up and coming, but they were still, you respect them musically. But I remember one of the coolest parts of it was when we're getting the session ready. I don't know why the whole group didn't go, but I had to meet with Brian at his house. So I went in this little music room with Brian to talk about the session we were going to do. And he has this, in those days, what they take home for reference were acetates. And what they were is when you say cut a record, you literally do that with an acetate. You put the needle on and it cuts the grooves as the sound comes through. And they only play about 10 times before they deteriorate. So he says, "Hey, I got this thing. It's going to be the next big thing." And I go, "Yeah." He says, "Yeah, listen to these guys." And he puts on "I Want to Hold Your Hand" by the Beatles. First time I ever heard it.
Wow.
I knew of the Beatles, though, because they had a slight hit with From Me to You on VJ that had been on the radio. And I liked that song. And I thought, oh, that's the Beatles, yeah. And sure enough, they were the next best thing. But then he sits down at the piano, he's playing. He says, "Here's a new song I wrote." And he plays "Warmth of the Sun" for me. And I have to tell you, it was a moment.
Let's see, we can date this now because Warmth of the Sun, I saw a documentary where he talked about the day John F. Kennedy was assassinated, and it touched him so much that he said he had an office there at Capitol in the tower someplace, and he and Mike Love got together and wrote that song.
Yeah, he had almost what I call as a Christian an anointing on him. It was just truly moving to hear him sing just with a piano. So that's one of my great moments with Brian. Then we got into a baseball league, and we played with Jan and Dean and Bruce Johnson and all those people, Terry Melcher, Doris Day's son.
Yeah.
And that was kind of my little hobnob thing there, my Hollywood days. And it was, I have to tell you, it was an intoxicating experience. I look back on it with great thankfulness that I was able to experience that in my life, because I love music so much. I still do today. I'm 76 years old, and I know who all the modern people are. Not all of them, because I'm not interested in all of them, but anybody who's making real music, I keep up with it pretty much. So I've always kept up with music. So for me to be in that
era
and in that group of people, you look back on it. Now, I was never a superstar, but I was playing with, I wasn't playing, but superstars were on my records. And, to look back, I met Leon Russell before he was ever famous. Glenn Campbell, same thing. We had guys like Barney Kessel, the famous jazz guitarist, was on a lot of our sessions. And then lesser known people that only musicians would know, but those three were prominent. It was a great season in my life.
You made a couple of references to, and usually we would do this first in the interview, but we just jumped into the music so fast. Go back and talk about alcohol and shooting pool and other sinful things. No, so your life, this is obviously way before Jesus in your life.
Yeah, I discovered alcohol when I was 15, and I was raised in Santa Rosa at the time where it was like, if you see the movie American Graffiti, that's my life. We tool town
Wow.
Friday night,
Yeah.
go around the drive-in, try to pick up girls, and if you could score alcohol, we were minors, but we knew people that could buy alcohol, and we'd get alcohol. And so, as I recall, the very first time I ever drank alcohol, there was a guy named Ernie Fye, who I hear is deceased now. He was a really great guitar player, and he had a rockabilly kind of a thing going. And he was in love with this girl named Patty Ford in Santa Rosa. And he wanted to go up to her house for some reason. He didn't want to go in and knock on the door. He just wanted to go up and admire her from afar, I guess. So we decided, I'd never drank alcohol, and we decided to get some alcohol. And so somehow I got a hold of a bottle of a fifth of Thunderbird wine. I didn't know how to drink. And I didn't have any, I had never been sick on it, so it didn't make me sick. So I literally guzzled this whole bottle of Thunderbird.
First time, and you're
time.
15 years old.
15.
Wow.
15-ish.
Ish.
I'm really bad with the years, so I want to be careful.
That's okay.
But around that age. So I'm thinking, we're driving along. 10 minutes later, I'm thinking, what's this drunk thing? I don't feel anything. Well, by the time we got there, I was like totally smashed, and I barfed all over her driveway, and that was my first. You think that would cure me, but it didn't. And I kept going back and figuring, how to drink. I loved the buzz. So, I was pretty alcoholic in those days. I was alcoholic during all the making of those records. What I do at night is, I was single. I just go into this bar and drink beer and shoot pool all night. And that was my life.
That was your routine. That was what you did.
And, eventually we hooked up with some guys from the Pasadena Playhouse, was right there. And we started connecting with some of the actors, and that's how I met Gary Lewis. He was going to the Playhouse, and actually that band came out of the Pasadena Playhouse, Gary and the Playboys.
Yeah. Wow.
And I was almost in it. We were hanging with all the actors. Some of them were famous. A guy just died that was in all the Rob Zombie movies named Sid Haig. That was one of our hangout guys. You can Google him, and he's a real bad-looking dude, not ugly, but really. I forget what his character was in those Rob Zombie movies. And then Stuart Margolin, who went on to be
Angel and Rockford Files.
Yeah.
You
those
knew
guys,
him?
Well, kind of in passing.
On the fringe, yeah.
They weren't, we had like poker guys that were our friends. So
Yeah.
we'd play poker for 3 days in a row, and, you just sleep on the floor for 6 hours and then get back to the poker game. Just that bachelor lifestyle.
Wow.
So that was kind of how my life was during those days. And so that was happening in studio as well. I could actually, had a little clout, and I could say, you guys got to bring me some booze so I can sing. And little did I know I couldn't sing, as I would find out later that it was, self-destructive and counterproductive and all that. There's a good line for a song. Self-destructive and counterproductive.
I'm writing it down. I expect a cut on the song.
Right. You should write it down, because I'll forget it. But what changed the whole scene for me was the Beatles, because we were in this studio group setting. There have been a few similar situations. Ron Dante, that did all the Yummy Yummy, I Got Love in My Tummy. He was
1910
same
Fruit Gum
thing,
and Archie's. And,
making all these records under different names.
Right.
So that's what we were doing. Well, the Beatles came in, and all of a sudden now nobody cares about the group. They want the self-contained band that can play and sing at the same time. Right. Knickerbockers, those kind of Lies, remember Lies?
Sure.
We just see these guys at the Red Velvet Club or something, and awesome musicians. But we weren't awesome musicians. We were more singers. So all of a sudden, we've got no way to make a living. So we put together different bands, and we'd have, we'd find musicians, and some of us would be singers and some would be musicians. And we got to a point where we said we had a bunch of interim bands that were really low. I mean, the band I remember the most was called Flat Coke, because that's how we felt. I don't mean cocaine. I meant
No
black,
fuzz.
no buzz at all. And that's where we were at. We were playing this little club up in La Puente or something for nothing a night, and just terrible, terrible time. Just thinking, what are we going to do with our lives? But we finally got this band together that got to Vegas, and we started the circuit where we would play. Well, actually, what happened was we got trying to think. Because we were Six the Hard Way still, but we were a different lineup. And we got to Vegas, and there was a group that was on the bill with us. We were playing a club called the Pussycat A Go-Go. And it was very, very prominent on the Strip. And the band that we played with was Stark Naked and the Car Thieves, they were called. And if you Google it, I believe it was somebody really famous. I think it was, he came to see them. I got to think who this is. And it was an off night. And he was real mad, and he put a big stir in the club and either got arrested or got kicked out of the club because he came to see Stark Naked and the Car Thieves. It was somebody, I have to Google that or something. Anyhow, so they were ready, they were having problems, and they broke up. So their bass player, our bass player was leaving or something like that. I forget the exact how it happened. Anyhow, we merged, and we brought Jack Beam was his name into our band, and so we made the circuit. We would travel. We had an agent, and we would do a circuit that would say you start in Seattle, and then you go down to Portland, and then you go to L.A., and then you go over. We played in Hawaii a bunch.
Wow.
It's kind of a cool thing. You stay a month at a time.
Whoa.
And get a little apartment with a kitchenette so you can cook. And so we also played Vegas that way. We'd play for a month at the Pussycat A Go-Go. And so this band comes in that's on one of these Vegas months called the Fifth Cavalry. And in that band is Denny Correll and Virgil Beckham, some people might know, and some other Orange County musicians. Well, they were wowing us. They were cool looking. They dressed in costumes. The one night the bass player would come in, he'd be dressed like a cowboy, and the next night he'd be dressed like a pirate. And they did all these theatrics, and they were great singers, great players, and they were great musicians, and they'd play trumpet with their left hand and
keyboards
with their right. And so they were
Wow.
blowing us away. It was like, who are these guys? This is
Showman.
awesome. And so, but in the meantime, we'd get on breaks, and Denny would come back, and he had been kind of turned on to God, and he preached to us. He'd take us in the back room and say, "You got to receive Jesus." He was a very forceful guy.
Really?
Yeah. And in fact, one night I think I received Jesus just to get him to shut up, but it wasn't a real deal. And so the month was over, and we were really into this Jesus thing, and there was a band that, I have to back up a little bit, on one of the other, this is important because it's how we got introduced to drugs. There was a group called Mirror of Karma that played in the slot. What you do is you alternate hours, and you play through the night. You'd start at midnight and get off at 8 in the morning.
Wow.
And they were into LSD, and that's how I had my first LSD trip, was they gave me some LSD. So that is a part of the story that needs to be, backed up and told so that people can understand what was happening.
Now, are we into the mid-60s now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you're how old? You're 20?
67-ish. 22,
Yeah.
21, somewhere in there.
Right.
So the cavalry, we're probably dropping acid in Vegas with the cavalry, and I don't remember having a lot of drugs during that season, but that's where I first took my first acid. So then they were leaving, and we were done for our month, and we had some time off, and they were playing at a little club in Orange County that was owned by one of the lead singer's father owned a club called Gold Street in Garden Grove. And it was a teenage nightclub. There's no alcohol, and they were the house band. So we went down to hang. Came back from Vegas, and we didn't have any gigs at that time. So we'd drive down there, and we'd watch them every night because they were electrifying. They were fascinating to watch.
Even without alcohol, they were.
Oh,
great.
yeah. They were just, we were probably smoking weed at that time or something. So Denny's getting hotter and hotter for God, and he's decided that he doesn't want to be in the band anymore. So we kind of reform ourselves around Denny, and we had a great drummer named Ernie. And we thought, well, why don't you come join our band? And so we kind of stole Denny from the 5th Cavalry, and we were getting ready. We wanted to, we had a booking to play there, and we wanted to blow them away like they'd blown us away. And with Denny in the band, we have a great singer, and we're writing some Jesus songs now. Denny wrote
Really?
wrote Changes.
Yeah.
That came out on
Denny wrote Changes?
co-wrote, yeah,
I didn't realize that.
yeah. And we had
But you're not you hadn't accepted Jesus by this time.
not real
you're just,
Christians
You're
yet.
just following along.
right.
Okay.
Yeah, we're in a Bible study and the whole thing now, but we're taking drugs.
Okay.
And there's a guy named George Grenier that Denny knew, that he said, this guy's hip to the Bible. You've got to come up and check out these Bible studies. So we started going up to George's house and reading the Bible. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. So anyhow, we're in this band now, and we're getting ready to blow the 5th Cavalry away, right? And we're auditioning guys for guitar. It was crazy because we were totally into a spiritual search. So if a guitar player would come in, we'd actually more find out about his morals and stuff. We'd say, do you believe this? Do you believe that? And he'd go, hey, dude, I just want to play guitar with you, you know. So finally we settled on some guy, and we put the band together, and we did pretty good that first night. But here was the clincher. A couple of days later, Ernie comes up, who was our kingpin, our drummer. He's a solid, great drummer, my best friend. He says, the Cavalry invited me, offered me a job. I'm going to go play with them. So there's the end of our band, you know, because, I mean, we could have gotten another drummer, but I think we weren't motivated. And I'm not sure that it worked that night. I think we were pretty good, and we had a good debut, but it didn't seem like it was going to be something we continue with, especially losing Ernie, who was, you know, how would we replace Ernie? So about this time, in fact, I need to back up again, because prior to this, there's a kid coming to see the Cavalry before we formed the band named Jay Truax, who was in a band called the Park Bench, and he was coming down to watch the Cavalry, and we got to talking, and so Jay became a part of that first band. I kind of left that out. We had Jay and Ernie and Denny, and I forget who played guitar, bass, and I think Denny started to play bass for a while.
So what are you playing at this point?
Keyboards.
You're on keys. Okay.
Yeah. So George is our guru, and we're going to his Bible studies, and he decides that the New Jerusalem is going to be on the island of Kauai, because it was the most pristine place on earth, which it wasn't, but that was his theory. And so we all needed to sell all our possessions because of Matthew 6. That's what the Bible says, and forsake the world. And we got into this whole thing. So now the whole band thing is kind of on the back burner, and we're all thinking about finding God. And so I lived in Pasadena, and I had bought my mother's house because I was making good money in the studio. So I actually owned a house, a small house. It was 1,000 square feet, 2 bedrooms. And but we had a hippie hangout there, and Jay lived up there for a while, and we'd all hang out. We'd play music all day long. And so now it came time I had to divest myself of all this stuff. So I had a yard. I call it the Great Yard Sale. I have a book of my memoirs coming out. I call it the Great Yard Sale. And we were all kind of disenchanted with society, you know, the greed, a lot like the climate today with the kids that want to be socialists, you know,
Right.
like, oh, we don't want billionaires
We're
owning
rejecting your way.
yeah. So I thought, I'm going to test the greed of man, and I'm going to sell anybody anything they want from my house for whatever price they offer me, and I'm not going to dicker, or I'm not going to debate. So I sold a piano for like $100. People were finding out about it. The doorbell rang at 6 a.m. and by like 10, everybody, hey, there's a crazy hippie here selling things for nothing.
Wow.
You need to get over here. So by the end of the day, I mean, people bought, we used to make beer in our garage. People come up, they buy these bottle caps. And I go, how much you want for these? $1? You want to buy those? What do you want them for? Stuff like that. I've decided, the way my little line was, if they'd have wanted to cut my wall out of my house and carry it out, I would have sold it to them just to see how far they'd go. And it was a real study in greed, because people got some really cool. I had an old Telefunken radio that was probably worth a couple of $100 that I sold for $10, and
Wow.
whatever they'd offer, I'd take it. And so that we raised about $500-600 that day, which should have been a lot more. But
Yeah.
so then that sort of becomes seed money to go to Hawaii now, because we're all going to now move to Hawaii, live off the land, become a commune, and wait for the New Jerusalem for Jesus to come back.
Right.
We literally believe this is going to happen. And because we're taking LSD, we decide, well, I think we're the reincarnation of the 12 disciples, all this crazy stuff. So Denny, I don't know how long he's been married, but he's got a couple of really young. The new baby was only like 6 weeks old, and the other kid was both daughters were about a year. So Margaret, Denny, the two kids and I, we fly to Hawaii. George is supposed to meet us. There's a couple of other people in this group that are supposed to hook up. So we fly to Kauai, Lahui. We come into Lahui. So we get off the plane. We have $500 in our pocket and nothing. We're just getting off the plane. We don't know what we're going to do that night.
I was going to say, did you have land? Did you
We
have
didn't have anything. We're just
You
getting
just
off the
following?
plane, following God. So we get off the plane, and I look across the street, and there's a little auto dealer. So I said, I'm going over here. I come back with a little Renault Dauphine that I paid $100 for. It's a little car. So we put everything in our Renault Dauphine, and we'd heard that up on the North Shore, which was the opposite side. No, wait, it wasn't the North Shore. It was up on the Kalaheo side. So we'd heard there were banana plantations, and that when it was off season, hippies would live in these they were open-sided little cabins that you could live in and not pay rent. So we stayed there for a few nights, but it wasn't very good for the kids. We had the babies with us, and
Are you out living in tents or outside?
no,
or?
we're living in these little cabins. They're covered.
They are cabins. Okay.
They're open-sided, and I wake up one morning and I've got dust all over my face. And I go, what is that? And I realize it's termites that were eating the wood, and it's falling on my face.
Whoa.
So Margaret's not too happy. So we decided, well, let's go to the North Shore, because we hear there's hippies up there. So we drive to the North Shore from Kalaheo. We stayed there only a few nights. And we went to actually the Hanalei Valley, which the land of Hanalei and Peter, Paul, and Mary's song.
Oh, yeah.
And back there were some more advanced cabins. They were still not populated because it wasn't season. So we moved into one of these more protected. It had 4 walls, but big spiders and no running water inside. You go outside to do your business and you get water from a hose. And we lived there for a while, but it was really not destined for the kids and all that, So I think we spent 2 weeks there, and Denny came up to me at one point, and he says, we have to go back to the mainland because this isn't working for us. And I said, well, I understand, So they took off. Now I'm alone, and I don't remember. I know I lived in a tent for a while. I lived in a tent talk about a bust. Next to the YMCA in a little wooded area, I put a tent up, and I was living in the tent, and there was this is a side story. There were these hippie kids that were real drug dealers. I didn't know it. And they were on their way to India to get more drugs or something, and said, we have all this weed. They had stacked as high as your shoulders.
Wow.
3 feet wide. They said, can we leave them in your tent? You can smoke all you want. Well, yeah.
Sure.
Do that.
I'm for that.
I find out I'm only 2 blocks from the police station later on, So I did. I had this free weed every morning, and I was a walking bust, but nobody ever did bust me. I was just living there by myself. And so anyhow, one day I'm on the beach, and I forget, I lived different places. I lived in tents for a while, and there were people that would let us stay in their homes for a couple of days. I never hooked up with everybody at once. The commune, quote, never got back together.
I was going to say, the people that followed eventually, you never...
We saw each other, but it was every man for himself, kind of, and there was no way to really put that together and practically be able to find a place for all. Preston Rush and his wife stayed in a cave for a while, and we slept in tents. We slept anywhere we could. So anyhow, I'm on the beach one day, and I had bought a little 3/4 size guitar with some of my profits from my because I didn't have a piano anymore, and I taught myself to play guitar. So I'm on the beach playing guitar, and this guy's coming toward me like he knows me, and I go, I'm on the beach here. I'm a hippie. Who's that? Turns out it's Jay Truax. Well, Jay had come over earlier than we had to scout, and he actually lived there for about a month before we ever went over there. And he hooked up with this guy named Vance, and they lived in a tent together, and they lived in the taro patch. And, there's nothing sexual going on. They just were guys seeking God. But he had decided, John Mailer, the drummer, they had already played together in Park Bench, so somehow they were communicating they wanted to start a band. So he'd moved to Salt Lake City, and they had started a band called Spirit of Creation. I'm probably getting this chronology weird. It's probably hard for people to follow, but hopefully we'll all come out at the right place at the end. So he's in Salt Lake City. I'm kind of backing up on the story a little bit. I'm in Hawaii. They become very successful. They got an agent, and they were very
Jay and
good.
John.
Jay and John, and a guy named Chuck Frere, who was a guitar maniac. He was so good on the guitar that he could sound like two guys at once. Just a little side note, he went on to win the Gong Show by he and a friend would get in a pair of overalls and they'd play duet harmonicas.
A single pair of, yeah.
Yeah.
I think I remember
And they
that.
won a couple of times. That was Chuck Frere. So they were opening because of this agency that was booking also Three Dog Night and Janis Joplin. They would put them, the Spirit of Creation, on as the opening act. So they had become a big band in Salt Lake City. They were exploring the possibility of adding keys. Well, I'm not that good of a player, but they thought of me, and so Jay came over to the islands to fetch me, kind of. And he says, "We want you to come back to the mainland and try to join the band." So he hands me a ticket. I knew they were making some bank apparently. So, and he went back, and so I had to fly back by myself later on. I remember I got on the plane. And it was winter, but you don't think about that in Hawaii because it's always balmy there.
Yeah.
I had no shoes. And I start to get on the plane, and the stewardess says, "You can't have no shoes on the plane." And I said, "Well, I don't have any shoes." So she got a pair of socks or something, that they give you. So just keep it on the down low and get in there. So I fly back to Salt Lake City, and it's winter, and I forget that it's winter. And
Wow.
somehow we had communicated the wrong time that I was coming, and I had said something like 7 a.m. or something, and it was really p.m. So no one's there to meet me. So I don't know what to do. I get off. I have a duffel bag and no shoes, and it's snowing.
Probably short sleeve.
And it's snowing.
Yeah.
I probably had a jacket. I don't even know. Maybe I didn't have a jacket. I don't know.
Wow.
So I start booking for town. I don't even know how I kept my feet from.
You walked?
I walked. I don't know where to go even. I'm just walking toward town, away from, the airport, toward town. So this guy comes around finally, and he's, "Chuck," it's one of the guys from the agency. And he discovered when my plane was really coming in, but they had gotten there too late to meet me. So anyhow, he found me and he took me to Jay's. But it never worked out with that band. I tried, and we had rehearsals and things. But I stayed there a year. And we took LSD and smoking weed, and it was a real different environment in Salt Lake City because it was a different vibe than LA. A lot of very cerebral people taking LSD. One of the guys went on to make mega bucks with some invention he made for the computer. Jim Wanless, I still remember his name. And apparently he struck it rich, and I don't know where he is today.
Are you still in search for God?
Yeah, oh yeah, this whole time. Yeah.
Would you have considered yourself a Christian in those days?
Well, I would, if you asked me what I was in those days, well, I'm mostly Christian, but I hadn't, you can't be mostly Christian, but that's how we looked at it. We're narrowing this thing down. Let me address that for a minute, because we had been studying all, George Harrison got us into Hinduism and different philosophies, and we learned about Timothy Leary, and we were studying all this Eastern philosophies, but nothing really rang true except for the Bible. And I remember also I heard, and didn't know who it was, preaching on the radio around this time. And I went, that guy's making sense. That's that's what I'm looking for. That's really, and it was Billy Graham.
Wow.
But I knew who Billy Graham was, but I didn't know it was Billy Graham. So I was heavily influenced. We were at that place where we were pretty much narrowing it down to the Bible. And so we dropped a lot of acid in Salt Lake City, and there was an occasion where they were going to have a hippie party out in Cottonwood Canyon, it's called. And everyone was going to drop acid and have a wonderful day. It was beautiful weather. At certain times of the year, Salt Lake's unbelievably balmy and perfect. So I'd had this acid before. It was called Brown Dot, and I had a great trip on it. I thought, well, I'll take another tab of Brown Dot. That's good acid. And so I go out there and drop acid. And somehow this is a really important story in my book, I drifted off by myself into the woods. And it was a God moment, but I didn't know it at the time. And I had this experience. It's like talking about being insane. If you believe that something is true, that you're a carrot, and you believe that, then you're a carrot, even though anybody else knows you're not, right? So I felt isolated in the universe. I was out there sitting on a rock, and all love, all other people went away. I was alone in darkness, like hell would be. No God, no love. And it was so crushing to my soul that I couldn't stand it. And if it hadn't been for now I know the grace of God, I started to hear sounds. It was like modulating, like a phaser, Mm-hmm. I heard people's voices and I go, oh, I got to get out of here. It was so devastating, alone, and dark. And so I came back to the group and I kind of started getting back to normal. And I sat in those days, nobody was thinking about whether you were gay or not. I sat next to this guy and I grabbed his knee because I just needed to touch somebody that was real. Mm-hmm. And came back to normal. And that was my last acid trip. And I said, didn't know who God was yet. And I said, okay, I'm not doing that anymore. And I never did. That was my last acid trip because that was so scary. And so, well, scary. So now I probably have the chronology, again, not exactly right, but Denny had moved back from Salt Lake, and he was we had formed a version of Love Song.
He had moved back from Salt Lake?
Salt Lake. I'm leaving out a part of the story.
Okay.
So we formed the first version of Love Song in Salt Lake City.
Okay.
Yeah. And Jay, now the Spirit of Creation had broken up. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here. So Jay and John joined the Salt Lake version, and we were going to kind of replace Spirit of Creation as the town band.
Just the three of you?
No, it was actually a large band. We had a couple of people that had been in another version of a band in L.A. that had actually moved to Salt Lake. They weren't hippies, and they didn't last long. But our first guitar players, Larry Britton and Jesse Johnson, Jesse co-wrote Love Song with me. They're both deceased. And they came back with their families, and a guy named Bobby Gadati. We had two drummers. We had John and Bobby. So it was sort of like a family band. It was about 10 people on stage.
And were you called Love Song?
Yeah, we were.
Where'd that name come from?
Well, we were in Vegas back in the day, and there was another musician there that I know Jack Schaefer for a lot of years. Either he was visiting or he was in our band for a while as a bass player. But we had taken acid, and one night he says, I have the perfect name for a band, The Love Song. It's what it's all about, love and music. And I never forgot that name. So when it came time to name our band, I just took that name, Love Song. I thought it was pretty representative of what we were all about. So there was a club there called the Old Mill, and it was a really cool place they made a club out of. And it was, an old grist mill, had big stones cemented together and big, huge inside area with the strobe lights and the whole deal. And so we would play there, and we became sort of the house band there. Well, somehow we had written we were playing some of our Christian songs. Oh, through the agency. So we had this song called Lead Me Out of California. That was the time when everybody thought it was going to fall in the ocean.
Right.
Earthquake coming any day. maybe take me to Hawaii, anywhere you send me is okay. We were surprised I'm remembering this much of the lyrics. So lead me out of California.
Well, let me
Yeah.
stop you there. Mindset wise, you would consider yourself sort of a Christian, kind of a Christian, but you were still looking in other places too. Definitely still doing drugs, still doing
Yes.
acid, still doing all kinds of other things. How did you look at the rest of the world? How did you look at at people who were committed believers?
We didn't know about committed believers. I mean,
Really?
we knew they existed, but they weren't on our radar at all.
Yeah.
We weren't visiting churches or anything. We were on our own, completely independent trip. And one of the things I observe about our path to salvation was that there was really no direct human outside of our group in discussing among ourselves, no outside influence till we got to Orange County and we started to hear about Calvary. So it was a complete drawing of the Holy Spirit, eliminating things, speaking to our hearts, affirming things, and maybe we were even born again through some of that. I don't know, because
Wow.
we kept coming closer and closer to the Bible and Jesus, But
Right.
at this time, we were still, open-minded.
Yeah.
But yet we were thinking, I'll speak for myself. Wherever I land, Jesus has to be a part of it, because this is part of it that's real. And I know it is, but I just don't know how he fits in yet.
Right.
I'd already made my decisions about whether God was personal or not, because that was an earlier thing of, is God just a big bang, or is he an individual that cares about me? And so I was past that already. So, but we're still singing these kind of Christian songs. Denny had one that he wrote, I've been around this place, I've seen the human race, da-da-da-da-da, that it was a typical, real rockin' thing, but it's Jesus, real evangelistic stuff, real right out in front. There was no attempt to be clever or hide it. So the agency, either we had a demo, they convinced somebody from Hollywood. Liberty Records sent a talent scout out. Lanky Lindstrot was his name. And he came out to hear the band, and he thought we were great. And he said, I'm going back and recommend that you guys get signed, and largely on the strength of this song, Lead Me Out of California, which they thought could be a hit.
Wow.
So I went to LA, and I took a meeting. I remember, I think I remember the guy's name is, now I said that, real weird name. I'll think of it. Anyhow, I think that it was me and someone else with me, and he took us into another room, and he said, you guys, what you're doing is God rock, and listen who else is doing God rock. And he puts on Let It Be by the Beatles. That hadn't come out yet.
Wow.
Well, he had mistaken that Paul wasn't singing about Virgin Mary. He was singing
Right.
about his mother, but to him it was God rock, Let It Be,
Right.
So he said, we're really into you guys because you're doing this God rock thing. And so
It's the future. Yeah.
yeah, that's what they thought,
Yeah.
based on that record. And so we had a contract that was drawn up, and it was pending. So now we go back to Salt Lake, and then Denny, somehow, I think he quits the band, and he goes to LA, and we're getting more disenchanted with being in Salt Lake City. And Denny calls me, and he says, I'm putting together another version of Love Song, Come to California. So I did. I went back to California. We landed in Orange County. We had a little apartment on Bay Street. And he landed us a gig at a club called The Happening. And we started to play at The Happening, and we became pretty well known in that little space.
So the Group's Love Song is just a toned down, stripped down version of the big band ish kind of thing.
About 5 players in
Yeah.
this version. But we're dropping acid. We're talking to people on breaks about going out to talk about God on the weekend. And we took people out. We were very evangelistic. But we were also stupid. And we would smoke a lot of weed, and we were a walking bust. We'd take our break, and we'd all walk out the back door. There was another room out there, like any narcs in there, And we're just, because we're protected, because God's on our side. See, they really believe that completely. Well, one night we finished the set, and we go out to get in our cars, and there's cops converge on us, and we had LSD on us. I threw some LSD away, and anyhow, we get arrested. Well, they didn't have enough room in jail for the hippies in those days, so we had to go to court. I must have got out on bail. They had me down for possession of heroin till they analyzed it and they realized it was LSD. But it was scary. And so I went to court and I got convicted, but I only got 1 day because they had so many hippies they were arresting for marijuana and stuff. They didn't have room in the jail, so they'd let you serve a small, just
fraction, slap on the wrist.
slap on the wrist for your sins, and then away you went. So, but it's kind of starting to wind down now. We're living in Laguna Beach. Now, we moved from Bay Street, and we got a house in South Laguna around the same time. And I don't know how we got it to this day because it was fairly upscale. It wasn't a large house, but it was in South Laguna overlooking the beach. We had a view of the beach out of our front window and a little mountain up on the top where we could go up and smoke weed and play music and stuff in nature. And it was idyllic. We had about 8 of us living there. You put up a little, Indian-looking blanket to separate your sleeping quarter and put your sleeping bag on the floor. But we were miserable because we had these drug busts. Everybody was facing these kind of things, these different busts. And it was God's bringing the net in, right? So another story that I have to tell that is possibly already happened in the chronology. This is all in my book, by the way, that's coming out soon, called Rock and Roll Preacher. And probably maybe by the time this thing comes out, it'll already be out. But we were going to take some weed back to Salt Lake City. We had been away from Salt Lake City for a while, but we were living in Laguna at this time, so I'm not that far ahead of myself. So we had a criminal-minded guy in our group. He wasn't really, he was sort of a musician, but he never played with us, and his name was Chris Friend. And he was sort of a amateur criminal. And we were going to take an ounce of hashish back to Salt Lake City. So he says, you take the door and you pull the door lining out, and you put the hashish down, you put black paper over it, and then put the door back. So if the cops shine the flashlight, they won't see it.
Right.
And I go, you're tripping, man, but do what you want. So we do that, and we had some LSD. It was Fred Field and myself and Chris. So we're driving to Vegas. We'd done it a number of times, so we knew that you had to go through there's a certain part where the freeway ends, and there's a 2-mile stretch where you have to pick up the freeway again. You have to go through town. So we're thinking, like, we've got to really be careful here because, we just don't want to get pulled over with this hashish in the car. So we get off whatever, Highway 15, wherever you have to get off, and we're going to be so cool, right? And we're driving real slow. Well, there's a cop car in the right lane next to us driving in the same direction, going slower than we are. So we have to, it'll look stupid if we lag too far behind. What we should have done is just pulled off and
waited.
But we keep going, and then I glance over at the cop, and I knew, look in his eyes, he's got some hippies to bust, right? So the next thing we know, the lights and the big dogs, man, they had dogs, they had shotguns like we were Al Capone up against the van, right? So we're all tripping on LSD. I don't think we had any weed with us, but we had the hash in the door. So about 20 minutes into the search, one cop comes back. He says, well, you guys look clean. I guess you hit it lucky tonight. So Fred pops off. He says, you can search the van all night. You'll not find anything. And we're kind of going, shut up, Fred. We're ahead right now, So shortly, a minute later, a cop comes back. He says, look what I found on the engine cover, right? After they've searched the van for 20 minutes, the engine cover is the first place you're going to look. So obviously they planted it. That's what I still believe to this day. So we're busted, and they take us into jail. They cut all our hair off and our beards.
No.
Didn't know if they legally could do that, but they did.
Wow.
So we look like little German scientists, with a... Fred, he's got a little bit of hash in his hand that he took through the whole booking process, the whole thing.
He's got it.
He's so stoned he doesn't know what to do with it, or he doesn't want to get rid of it. And he got it all the way into his cell, and he eats it. So he's having a final time in jail.
He doesn't care.
Yeah, but how he got it through is just spectacular, you know. So then also they said the FBI went through the van and they never. Oh, the guy, by the way, did shine the flashlight when they were first pulled us over.
Yeah.
And I went, all right, Chris, you're right, man. This is working. Thank you, Chris. They never found the hash, but we still had the bus hanging over our heads. So now that's why I told that story, is because we're back in Orange County, and we've got these various things hanging over our head, and it's perfect, ripe pickings for God to bring in the net. So we start hearing about Calvary Chapel from hitchhikers.
I'll stop you right there.
Yeah.
Let's stop.
When I was young, my life was rock and roll music, just digging the wonderful sounds. I'd get home